Hello, everyone. I spoke a little while ago about having walked the Camino de Santiago in 2010, an ancient pilgrimage route. The route I took was across the north of Spain, from just inside the French border, but people walked from and travelled from every direction to arrive in Santiago de Compostela, into a cathedral that has a silver box in it, tucked away in a corner, that is purported to have a fragment of bone from the Apostle James. For many people, the importance of arriving into the square outside the cathedral, where there is a big sort of round brass plate in the cobbles with sort of lanes leading to it from all directions, is a deeply significant moment. And for many people as well, attending the cathedral, for those who are particularly religious and particularly those who are Roman Catholic, one of the highlights of the entire experience, whether you've walked for a week or a month or however long, is to attend Mass, to go into the cathedral and take part in one of the acts of worship in the cathedral. I'm always a bit unsure about the use of the word holy when we talk about places. We talk about the Holy Land when we talk about Israel and Palestine. We talk about churches as holy sites. And I think it's important to ask what we mean by that. Do we mean that God is somehow especially or more powerfully or more qualitatively present in some places than in other places? I don't think so at all. I used to say when I was at the university, in the church just across the road from it, it's one of the part of the team there, that the area inside the communion rail was no more holy than the toilets in the pub across the road frequented by students. That God is democratically omnipresent in every place, in every way. But of course, these places are enormously meaningful for us as human beings because they capture our sense of collective memory, of ritual, of meaning. We imbue meaning into places, and we do that together, and we have for centuries and centuries erected altars and sacred stones and built things that have been reminding places for us, or encounter places for us, at least with ourselves. Places that are marked by a particular desire to connect with something beyond ourselves. And they take all kinds of forms, from Stonehenge to York Minster to little tiny altars built of all kinds of things tucked away in hills, marking places, remembering places, revisiting places to gather in communities that are about particular things. I'm a bit dubious about cathedrals, not because I don't think they should be there, of course not, but because I think they represent something far more about human beings than they do about God. But they're there. And I went to the cathedral in Santiago and sat through about half of a service there. But it was just such an odd environment, with people milling around all the time. You can take photos but not video, and in the midst of the priests doing their best to maintain the integrity of the worship that they're trying to offer, and the ritual they're trying to perform. People around them, behind them, all it's a bit of a show, and didn't move me nearly as much as the landscape had moved me for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of feeling very small in a very large landscape. In the cathedral in Santiago, they have what's called a botafumeira. It's one of the largest censers in the world, which, if you don't know what that is, it's a thurible, and of course that clears up everything. What's a thurible? A thurible is, if you've seen any kind of formal religious service in the Church of England, in the Roman Catholic Church, there's often someone called a thurifer who walks as part of a procession and as part of the worship, and carries on the end of an ornate kind of stick a hanging censer, an incense burner, which they swing ritually from side to side, and it emits perfumed kind of scent into the air as part of the heightening of the senses. And some people say that has its roots in Jerusalem temple worship in ancient Jewish times. we've used smoke and sense and smell for in all kinds of ways. But some people say that the thurifer actually is kind of a deodorant can. That one of the purposes it serves, or it did certainly serve in ancient times, was to make the church a bit more pleasant smelling. Because when you had, especially in a place like Santiago de Compostela, when you had literally hundreds of thousands of people a year converging on a place, largely unwashed for most of their lives, never mind through the arduous trek that they'd made, gathering them all into this confined space, seated on the floor next to each other, would have been a bit pongy. And so one of the purposes that the thurifer serves, the thurible serves, is to essentially help the church smell sweet. Now, the one that's in Santiago de Compostela is huge. It's over 1.5 meters high. It weighs 80 kilograms. It takes 8 men dressed in special robes to pull ropes in unison so that it swings right across the nave of the church. I didn't actually see it swinging, but because it doesn't always do that, special occasions only. But I'm quite tickled. Please don't think for a moment this is any kind of snobbery or dismissal. But I'm tickled by the way that it seems so often our rituals have their roots in something quite practical, and the deep religious significance attached to one of the world's largest deodorant cans, swinging in a church full of smelly people, is something to think about. So what is church for? Well, I wanted to talk a bit about that this morning because yesterday heard Bishop Philip North, who is one of the bishops in the Church of England, speaking on Radio 4 about a letter that's been written and signed by, I think it was about 600 clergy, and who were saying to the church that they should reopen their buildings because people need the buildings. And some of that is about the way that buildings are community spaces or fulfill vital community functions, even in the midst of even things like food banks and the distribution of essential supplies. But a large part of that seemed to be about people saying, we want to get back to praying in church. We want to get back to worshipping in church in some way. And Philip North wasn't resisting that. But I disagree with him on a number of things. But I was really taken by his passionate advocacy of the church as something and somewhere where the poor are taken seriously and made safe and treated well. And that the most important thing might not be for us to rush back to thinking about how are we going to gather on a Sunday? What are we going to do? Will we be able to sing with face masks on? All these questions are alive and abound. Yesterday in our staff meeting across the ministers and lay staff as part of the York circuit, a wider collection of well over 30 churches, and there were, I think, 16 of us online. One of the things we talked about was the beginnings of a strategy to reopen our churches in time. Just to think about it at this stage, we need to do that. And behind that for me is always the question, what for? What do we want to be in the building for? Because the building is not the church, and the church's mission is served by the building, but it isn't the building that is the mission. What we're asked to do, when we read the Gospels especially, I mean, we read the Gospels of the life and works and speaking and sayings of Jesus as accurately as we have them. What we discover is a kind of radical vision for a just, socially responsible, peacemaking, honest, open, and welcoming society, community, family of people. I remember having a conversation once with an Anglican person who came to the university as part of an open day. Their child was wandering around looking at the university, and so they came and chatted to us on the chaplaincy stall, and we were chatting about church, and he said, and his eyes were just bright, but he said that a year before their building had been essentially condemned, that their church was no longer safe, and so they'd moved as a congregation into the local school. And I said to him, "Oh, how has that gone? What's changed in the church's identity? How is it?" And he said, "It's been amazing." So we've got lots of new people coming. We're on neutral territory. We have this fantastic relationship with the school building. And And I said to him, so if you had the possibility of going back to church, he said, I don't want to go back. Don't want to go back to a constrained building full of architecture designed around a sort of a single purpose that isn't necessarily community or the things that are possible for us now. I don't remember his exact words, so please understand. I'm paraphrasing, but the force with which he said, I don't want to be part of a church in a building anymore because of the liberation that's come our way because of that. Was something to consider. So yes, the conversation is alive. When will we gather in our buildings again? When will we worship again in the way we used to? Because we are doing that. We're just doing it differently. We're doing that in Haxby and Wigginton twice a week. We're using Zoom. On Wednesdays we have a smaller gathering for coffee and conversation largely. On a Sunday we have a much larger gathering of 70 to 80 people who break out into little rooms virtually where they have conversation about some questions. We sing along to some fantastic YouTube videos if we want to do that. We've had creative prayer. It's been intimate because we've all been looking at each other's faces for an hour rather than the back of each other's heads or just my face for 20 minutes as I go on and on about something. So what is church for? What is church? Well, it's not the building. And whenever we get back into the building, we will do that perhaps, I hope, with some fresh eyes on what is most important in our use of the building and what the building represents. See, I felt for a long time that when you read the Gospels, Jesus' intention was not for us to build buildings and to gather on a Sunday in an extremely busy way, often on our day of rest and leisure, to gather on that day to essentially spend quite a lot of time, it would seem, telling God that God is wonderful, that somehow the Sabbath, and I've talked about this in another video, that Sabbath is about paying attention to God, because the Gospels are about justice and about peace and about forgiveness and about open-heartedness and about letting go of prejudice and wounds and the damage that's been done to us by by people we have loved and who have tried to love us, and people who we don't know, and the history we've inherited and the assumptions that come with that, and the fact of so much enemy imagery around us all the time. What is church for? And when will we be back? Well, we haven't gone away. And you know that, I hope, as you watch this. We're gathering in different ways, we're reflecting in different ways. And of course, in a church like Haxby and Wigginton or any church, what we do in the building is a tiny fraction of what all of us together do individually in our lives. As we take part in wider communities and societies, as we give our time to good causes, as we think about what we do with our money, as we honor God and the best that we know of God and the best of ourselves daily in the choices that we make. I really do understand the symbolic significance of particular places, of set-aside places. I have my collar on because later today I'm going to go and spend 10 minutes with 3 members of a family under a gazebo outside the crematorium, paying tribute to a woman I met first 16 years ago, who is just remarkable woman called Jean Peacock. And Jean deserved to be remembered well in the midst of a crowd in a Methodist church which was so deeply part of her life. Not here, because the church she was part of is no longer really one of our churches in some ways, but she today's send-off is all the poorer for not having that space available to us. It is incredibly valuable for some things. For all kinds of things, but it is not the center of our life in our following of Jesus. And so I wait with interest to see what tomorrow's announcement from the government will be about which sections of our life will open up first, and then what we will do with our religious spaces. what we will do with them, and what will be most important, and whether we'll rush back to the same things we've been and done, or whether we'll have the courage perhaps to not do that and just see what emerges and what is valuable. And even how the building is not part of the church in a good way for many people, and where the internet and where apps like Zoom and other things become part of our staple diets in the way we go about looking each other in the face and asking what it means to, for those of us who say that, follow Jesus, for all of us, wrestle with deep questions about the mystery of life and death and everything that we do that's part of us living together and doing the best we can to help shape the world positively. So maybe you're really missing church. Maybe you think the church should be open anyway, just because there should be the opportunity to drop in. Maybe not coming to church has been a relief for you, and other things have been actually far more meaningful, and that itself has been a revelation. Other ways of expressing faith, learning faith, being in conversation about faith. We'll get back there one day. What we'll do exactly is unsure. Whether it will look like exactly what we did before I'm quite sure it won't. But we'll get back there. In the meantime, let's be the church, or let's just be good people in every way that we can. And wherever you attach significance to place symbolically, and wherever our memory is held of those whom we've loved and those who've helped us to know who we are, let's let those places also be transformed, perhaps, by this experience. So have a good day, and I'll be back again with a little bit more tomorrow. And then, as I've said before, I'll be taking Thursday and Friday as my kind of weekend, because that is my weekend, and I need that. So back again for a bit tomorrow. And tomorrow I think I'll be talking a bit about what directions I think these videos will go in the weeks to come. Bless you. Cheers.